I pledge
allegiance
allegiance
to the flag
of the
of the
United
United States of America
and to
and
the republic for which it stands,
stands
one
one
nation,
nation
under
under
God,
God,
indivisible,
justice,
with liberty and
and
justice
justice
for
for
all.
all. Thank you. Okay, we'll start with the agenda approval. I guess should we do a roll call first, right?
Yes, please.
Let's do a roll call. Thomas here, Bodema,
Here.
Anderson,
Here.
Dejewski,
Here.
and Schultz.
here.
Okay, thank you. Now we'll go on to the agenda approval. Is there any changes or additions from staff?
Mayor and Council, yes, I have 3 items actually for changes. They're all additions under new business. The first is absentee voting for a statewide primary election. These are items that were emailed out either late last night or today at some point. So Jessica can walk through that. A second, 9D, a resolution authorizing the granting of regulatory flexibility to local businesses. And then 9E, 2020 staffing, specifically related to the city planner and maintenance worker positions. And I can walk through those at new business later in the agenda, please.
Okay, any changes or additions or comments from the council?
No.
Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to approve the agenda as modified.
So moved, Dejewski.
Second, Anderson.
All in favor signify by saying aye. Thomas, aye. Anderson,
Aye.
Bodema,
Aye.
Dejewski,
Aye.
and Schultz.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Okay, commission representatives, we have Jim, and who else is here from?
It'd be Alicia Hoffman if she's attending from the Parks and
Alicia's
Trails
not here.
Commission.
Okay. If something comes up, Jim, you want to be recognized for, let us know and we'll get you
Will
in
do.
on the conversation.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll start with open forum. At this point, anyone who could wish to dial *9. You're muted, Brad.
*9 now, and Jessica will see if anyone wishes to speak. So if you want to
Okay.
speak under open forum, there will be other opportunities. There is a public hearing specifically for dust control. So this will be typically items that aren't on the agenda. Other items on the agenda will be spoken to later, typically. So press *9 if you're interested in commenting. So we have 1. So Jess, I'll let you lead that.
Thanks, Brad. Individual with a phone number ending in 5555. I'm going to unmute you now and feel free to speak. If you could please state your name and address for the record, that'd be great.
Hello, my name is Joe Maas. I live at 6715 Willow Drive. And I didn't know if it was this open forum is the correct place to bring up a concern I've got about the safety of some of the gravel roads. Is this the correct forum?
This certainly works. Yeah, this is fine.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much. And I'll just try to be brief because I know that everybody is, aware of the issues and has been discussing, the ideas of doing some light paving or something. I did send out an email, and I don't know if everybody got it. I had spoke to a couple of the council members, but I'm having an ongoing concern, in particular about Larkin Road, where it's not paved, Willow Drive, Homestead Trail, and Horseshoe Trail. I did get today an email from Kevin that I think it was Mr. Anderson was kind enough to send some concerns to Kevin about the maintenance schedules for the roads, which I got in it. My experience has been that the safety of this road is becoming in question. And I know that it's difficult to maintain a dirt road, but the current things that are being done are just not sufficient to ensure safe travel on the road.
Okay. Okay, well, thank you for your input, Mr. Mana. And just, I guess, be aware, we are looking at the paving of gravel roads. We have been for 20 some years and we'll continue try and work something through one of these days.
Okay,
Okay.
I understand. Just a quick question I would have to that is there anything that I can or should be doing to help the process? I don't want to be in anybody's way or try to, push anything, but I'm really having a concern about the safety. Is there anything that I should be active in helping with?
Well, I think giving your comments is very helpful. It lets people know that there are people in support of paving the roads. Other than that, you're a citizen of the city and you have a right to speak to council members and staff and fellow residents to gain some momentum for the efforts. So, but yeah, nothing specific that I can name. I don't know of anything to tell you other than doing what you're doing.
Oh, okay, thank you. And just the further comments that I would have concerning if assessments are necessary, I would be in favor. I know that that could be difficult for some of my neighbors or such, but I understand that there's only so much money that goes around.
Sure.
And also, just anecdotally, and I'll just be brief so you can get on to your other business. There was a project that I'm aware of in a nearby city where the state had some extra money for a non-conforming corner on an existing road. So I didn't know if, when we get to a part, if paving gets to be done and state money is involved, but I do know that there was some extra state money and that the Larkin to Willow corner may fall under that.
Okay. Well, thank you for your input. Appreciate it.
Okay. Thank you all for your good job.
Thank you. Is there anyone else, Jessica, for open forum?
No one else at this time has raised their hand.
Okay. Okay, then we'll move on to item 6A, which is a the 2019 audit presentation from Mr. Nelson and Mr. C at Abo Eckemers.
All right, good evening. Everyone can hear me correct? The biggest fear is
Yes.
talking for 5 minutes without anything being heard. So, well, I guess just I'll first start by saying thank you for having us tonight. We appreciate you taking the time to listen to the presentation and go through things with us. And I also like to just, while we're getting set up, just say thank you to Jessica and to Brad and Joe at the city too for all their help with the audit. It is a little bit outside of their normal duties, so we appreciate all their help in getting all the information to get through the audit. So thank you to them, and thank you to the council as well for having us as your audit firm. We appreciate that. So, well, I guess I'll just get right into it here then, and start on slide 3 here, and just go over the audit results for 2019. So, in 2019, we did issue a clean, unmodified audit opinion for the city, which is the cleanest and best audit opinion the city can receive. So how we arrived at that opinion in this year was a little different due to the circumstance. We actually did our audit fully remote this year and tested a number of different transactions with paying bills, paying employees, utility billing transactions, looking at what the council is getting to make decisions, et cetera. So with that, we don't have any audit findings in 2019 to report tonight. So again, a positive thing there, a clean audit opinion with no internal control findings. So overall, a really great job by staff in the city. So the second thing we are required to test as part of our audit is Minnesota legal compliance and state statutes. So a couple of the things we do test, and just some examples of what some of the things we are specifically testing for are conflicts of interest at the council level or at the city, testing of timely payment of claims, and a third one would be testing of contracts and bids. So again, I already mentioned there has been no audit findings for 2019. So again, everything passed, and an overall great job with those things. So Jessica, you can flip to the next slide. Oh. I'm sorry, I had the presentation up on my screen too, sorry. Okay, so we'll go to slide 4 here and just look at the results from prior years. So there was a finding in 2018. We do just like to give an update on, you are on the right slide, I'm sorry, I'm confusing you. Just like to give an update from prior year on the findings that it did exist. So last year there was a collateral coverage finding. The city was under collateralized with its deposits. So we just like to show progress there and note that in 2019 that finding has been removed, and again overall positive there. So with that, we'll flip to slide 5, and Tyler C, senior auditor, will take over for a couple slides.
Is there any chance, because there are citizens here listening, that you could just explain briefly what collateral coverage is?
Certainly, yep. So the city does have cash and investments that it holds. So anything over, and when we specifically talk about deposits or cash separate from investments, deposits are covered up to $250,000 at the bank through FDIC. So anything over that $250,000 requires the bank to pledge collateral. So if things start to fail and things of that nature, that there would be collateral held for the city to again be whole in case again some of those banks were to fail and things of that nature. So is that enough to answer your question, or would you like some additional?
Well, I'm fine with that. I'm a finance guy, but
sure.
It's important for people to know,
Gotcha.
you know, what you're talking about. If there's a finding, it's just important for people to hear an explanation.
Certainly. Yeah, no, thank you. And to be clear, that was a finding in the prior year, and there was no issues related to that finding. That has been corrected. The city's deposits were fully collateralized in 2019. So again, something that has been corrected and good progress there. So.
All right, can everyone hear me okay, first of all?
Yep.
Okay, I'm gonna jump in here and talk about some of the city's funds and the results for the year 2019. So this first graph, we're specifically looking at the general fund balances in comparison to the next year's budget. So if you look at that green line, that shows the budgets of 2016 to 2020. And then the blue and the gray line show the general fund's unrestricted and unassigned fund balances in comparison to the following year's budget. So as you can see from at the end of 2019, the unassigned fund balance is at 39% of the following year's budget, which is above the city's policy of 35%. And the unrestricted amount just includes a portion of the fund balances assigned for long-term planning. So there is a slight difference between the unrestricted and unassigned fund balance. And you can go ahead to the next slide now. This next slide shows the revenues and expenditures in comparison to the city's final budget. So if you look at that top line, you can see that the revenues had a positive budget variance of about $500,000 from the final budgeted amount. The main reason for this budget variance is because of building permit activity and building permit revenue. And if you look at the next slide down, the expenditures were $340,000 over budget, and that's for a similar reason. The extra expenditures are really for building inspection fees. So then if you go down, you can see that there's also a lot of transfer activity. There are transfers out of $695,000. This was to capital funds, mostly the City Hall remodel fund, as well as a couple other transfers to asphalt maintenance and capital equipment fund. So all in all, the fund balance decreased about $200,000 in the general fund because of transfers to capital funds for future projects. You can go ahead to the next slide. So this graph shows the different types of revenues in the general fund from 2017 to 2019. The different revenue sources are taxes, license and permits, intergovernmental charges for services, and other revenue sources. As you can see here, the tax revenue is the majority of the revenue source for the general fund. And then you can also kind of see the license and permits the increase from 2018 to 2019 because of that increased building permit activity. Then you can go on to the next slide. This slide shows the general fund expenditures by type. So for the last 3 years, 2017 to 2019, the different categories are general government, public safety, public works, and transfers out and other expenditures. Here again, you can see that increase in the public safety expenditures from 2018 to 2019 because of building inspection fees primarily. And then also the transfers out, pretty decent size increase there because of the transfer outs to the various capital funds. Go to the next slide. This slide highlights all the city's special revenue funds. There are currently 8 special revenue funds for the city. All of these funds are restricted or committed to the specific purposes of each fund. You can see from 2019 to 2018, the overall fund balances of these 8 funds increased 30,000. And on the bottom, from 2017 to 2019, the fund balances for these funds in total have been steadily increasing the last 3 years. You can go to the next slide. And then this slide highlights all the capital project funds that the city has. At the beginning of the year, there were 12 capital project funds. 2 of those funds were closed by the end of 2019. And just kind of highlighting, the main activity of these funds. There's a lot of development-driven activity, but some of the major activity for the year is in the Bellwether Fund. There were a couple of projects, a sewer project, and I believe the 100th Avenue Turn Lane project was in that fund for the year. Also, future projects coming out of that fund. And then I guess another thing to highlight is that there are a lot of transfers from the general fund to mostly the City Hall remodel fund, but also a transfer to the capital equipment fund as well as the asphalt maintenance fund. And that's all I got for that slide. And then this slide highlights the city's governmental debt service funds. There's currently 4 debt service funds at the moment. At the bottom, you can see the future principal and interest payments. From 2020 to 2024, the total principal and interest payments coming out of the governmental funds is about 800,000. And then it kind of dips to 700, and by 2029, you're looking at about 400,000. So that kind of highlights the future debt service payments.
All right, good. Thanks, Tyler. I'm going to jump back in here and just switch gears and talk about the city's enterprise funds, which are 2. So I'll start with the city's water fund, and this is just a chart of its cash balances. So a pretty positive chart here showing a positive trend over the past 4 years. Cash going from about 1 million to a little over 3 million in 2019. So again, overall pretty positive there. From what I understand, there may be some activity and some capital needs there to use some of those funds up. But so obviously just important to keep monitoring those rates and make sure to monitor that capital plan for future capital. But overall, positive sign there for the cash balance in the water fund. So the next is the sewer fund. We see a similar trend and a similar positive thing. I think the needs for capital maybe in the future, maybe not as great, or specifically in the near future, but overall things have gone from about 500,000 to close to 1 million in 2019. So overall, a positive trend. So the last thing I'll say is, I know we talked about this last year and have it a couple of years, but there is some unspent bond proceeds in the sewer fund. Those funds can be used on future capital purchases. Again, if there's any that should arise in the future. So the next and last slide here to kind of wrap things up with the city's funds is just to show the city's cash and investments separated by fund balance type. So again, as we've talked about in a couple other slides, the trend has been in a positive direction from about a little over $8 million up to close to $14 million in 3 years. So there's a lot of things that go into that, building reserves and capital funds, development, all kinds of different things that go into that. But overall, it's better than seeing things go the other way. So I think a positive trend. And the last thing I'll say here is is I think there's a good balance between capital, general fund, and enterprise funds as well. I think it shows some good financial health of the city to have such a big gray bar there and having money in their enterprise funds as well. So overall, I think a really positive chart there to show the city overall. So the last few slides are just some key performance indicators and just some charts we put together for the council to use as a resource. I'll go quick through them. What they do is they compare the city of Corcoran to cities under 10,000 in population. They also compare to the cities in Hennepin County. So again, no city really compares all that favorably to another. They all have their own story and are all very different. But again, just a way to compare Corcoran to others. So if we look at the first one, we look at this chart, we try to put the taxes on the same one. So we have a tax rate chart and we have a taxes per capita chart. So if we start with tax rate, we look at the blue line, which is the city of Corcoran, between that sticking around that 45% as a tax rate. So overall, pretty steady tax rate, which is a good thing there. Maybe a little bit higher than the Hennepin County cities, but definitely well in line and below kind of that average for those fourth class cities. So good thing there. And as we move to the second one, with a gross city taxes per capita, with a growing number of residents, I think this one's to be expected as well. A little bit on the higher side, specifically within the fourth class cities, but kind of right in line with the cities in Hennepin County. So we flip to the next slide. Looking at the debt, I think this is another one too. I think based on my experience, growing communities tend to have a little bit more debt or have a lot of debt. So I think knowing where the city is, I think having it well in line with the cities in the county and below the cities in the class, I think is a positive thing. Whether that changes in the future, who knows? But I think overall, for now, I think it fares very favorably and a really, really positive sign there. So if you flip to the next one. I'll just go over the last one here is we just, again, compare and put together looking at the current expenditures per capita or per resident, as well as capital expenditures per capita. So again, as I've already mentioned, I think with the growing number of residents, I think this is to be expected a little bit on the higher side as it compares to some of those other cities in both the current and the capital expenditures there too. And one thing to just note with the capital related expenditures too is within the city, a lot of those expenditures are developer based, so they do run through the city, but they're completely separate from a lot of the things that relate to taxes or others. So with that, we've reached the end. So does anybody have any questions they would like to ask of either of us?
Well, I have one.
Certainly.
Ron, can I speak, please?
Mr. Mayor, I think he's Councilmember Bottom is asking if he can speak.
Pardon me?
Councilmember Bottom is asking.
Permission to speak.
I'm sorry, I didn't. Well, go ahead, John. Yeah.
Okay. We have on page 40. There is an expenditure of the post, the sticker thing. There's $487,000 of licenses and permits over our expected amount. So it's documented there, and you'd said that that's sort of due to the building permits from the current year or the previous year. But then there's, you had said that a lot of that is offset by the city expenditures within the, the inspection and all that stuff. And it seems that the license and permit one, it's obvious, like you can see where it came from, but I'm looking for how you find the specifics on the cost incurred to, the cost incurred specifically related to that extra income for permits and licenses for builders.
And Justin, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I believe that's actually in public safety under expenditures. Is that correct?
Correct. Yep.
So it's harder to see that, but the expenditures are under public safety for some reason. Justin could explain that I can't.
And it's just what the OSA thinks is the best practice. I know we've gone back and forth on where to show, whether it's public works or whether it should really honestly be its own section, honestly, because it kind of is, but it is included with public safety because that's what the OSA classifies it as.
And so okay, I appreciate that, but can we actually get the number?
Of exactly what the permit piece is?
No, we got the permit piece on the
Or the
inflows.
inspection
But what
piece,
about
you mean?
the inspections and the cost to the city? You said we have an increase of spend due to permits and licenses, and we have an increase in revenue due to permits and licenses. And one is itemized on page 40. The other one is within public safety. Is there a way to pull it out? I don't see it in
Yep.
here.
If you go to, for some reason, it looks like our report isn't numbered, but if you go to page 92, there's a page number on 91 and there's a page number on 93. If you go in the middle there, you should see the itemized general fund budget to actual schedule revenues and expenditure itemized. That is a page 40. What you're looking at is a summary of what's on page.
Yeah.
Starting on page 90.
And Mayor and Council, let's jump in.
Okay.
That's not 100% of the cost either. Those are the hard costs related to contract inspection. We have a lot of other costs that are not incorporated in that.
Totally get it. I just want to have but yes, I agree with that, but I am trying to find that piece. Like, how do we sift through and find that piece? There are tons of other costs involved. I just want to see what is actually in the document. And which page is that on?
It's on page, for some reason our PDF doesn't have a page number there, but it's page 92. So
yeah, I am not seeing it. Other services and charges.
This is as far as we go in the financial statements, I guess, if that's your question, but the building inspections is towards the middle bottom of that page 92.
Okay, I got it. All right, I see it. Thank you. That's what I needed.
Certainly.
I don't have any questions other than that. Appreciate it.
Okay, John. Thanks. Anybody else have any questions?
Yeah, I've got a question.
Go ahead, Brian.
So Justin, I don't remember if it was Justin or Tyler doing the tax rate versus taxes per capita slide, but if you can go back to that on page 15. Just again, for those who are tuning in or watching this at a later date, could you explain the difference between having a tax rate lower than the average class 4 city, but yet having taxes per capita at a higher tax rate or tax level than other class 4 cities? I mean, it could be as simple as just population, but I just wanted to have that explained.
It really is just based on population. I mean, the tax rate goes into a calculation with overall market value. So that, I mean, it really does come down to residents and per home, and per home, like a median home average as well. So
what you're saying is on this chart, the lower chart is just made up of the number of class 4 cities with more population than the city of Corcoran is higher in this case, correct?
Likely. I mean, it really does. It's just total taxes that the city has divided by its residents. So, you know, there are cities in here with 10,000 population. There's cities with 3,000 population. So those are they're all mixed together, and that's kind of the average. But
well, wouldn't it speak to average housing values?
Mainly, it's the top one is mainly related to home values and how many homes, and again, I guess similarly, the taxes per capita is just overall taxes per number of people or residents.
Okay,
So
thank you.
it's two different ways of looking at it.
So well, one would assume our tax base per capita is up there, same as at a higher level than the taxes per capita, since our tax rate is lower or competitive.
Tax rate is typically a better metric to look at.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? Yeah, the only comment I'd like to make is I think this just confirms what we've known all along, that just an ongoing confirmation that our staff just does a great job with managing our finances, and I think it gets reflected here, and I think we're doing a good job. I appreciate it very much for staff, and I appreciate you, the folks, your audit, and doing a professional job on it, and it's a good presentation.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having us. And if there's any other questions, feel free to reach out to us after. So
Yeah. Okay, if there's no other questions or other comments, we'll move on the agenda.
Actually, Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
I forget this every year, so I wrote it down this year. We do need a motion to accept the 2019 audit as presented.
Okay. I'll entertain a motion to accept the 2019 audit as presented.
So move, Schultz.
Second, Anderson.
Okay, all in favor, signify by saying aye. Thomas, aye. Anderson,
Aye.
Bodema,
Aye.
Dejewski,
Aye.
and Schultz.
Aye.
Great, thank you. And thank you, gentlemen, for the presentation and all your hard work.
yeah, thank you. Have a great rest of your meeting.
Thank you,
Thanks.
guys.
Thank you.
Okay, now we will move on to item 7, the consent agenda item consisting of 7A through F. Would anyone wish to pull any items? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to approve consent agenda items 7A, B, C, D, E, and F as presented.
So move, Dejewski.
Second, Schultz.
All in favor signify by saying aye. Thomas, aye. Anderson,
Aye.
Bodema,
Aye.
Dejewski,
Aye.
and Schultz.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Now we're on to unfinished business. At this point in time, we'll take public comments. If anyone wishes to, dial *9, and Jessica will put you on for public comments. And just for your information, we're going to be talking about the Northwest Corcoran Water Supply Work Plan Update and the City Hall's closure extension are the items.
Mayor, at this time, I do have one individual who has raised their hand. Their phone number, actually 2 individuals who have raised their hand. We'll call on first the individual with the last 4 digits of their phone number as 4794. Please state your name and address, and I'll unmute you now.
Unmuted. I must not be at home then. My name is Tom Spitzka, 9103 Kane Road. This is year 3 for me, commenting on dust control as far as double taxation. You can look back at the other meetings. It says that if you live on a tar street, you pay X amount of taxes at a rate. I live on a gravel road. I pay that same rate. You get your surface redone for your road, and I pay for part of that, and I get dust control, and I pay for that individually. Nobody else pays for it. Last meeting, I spoke directly to Ron Thomas and said, you know, the meeting before, 2 meetings ago, you said that your feeling, and I suggested respectfully, I don't care about your feeling. And then I believe if you look back at the end of the last meeting, there had been discussion amongst the group that this individual fee would be eliminated. And I talked to somebody in Sandy County, which is bigger, I think, than us, and they don't, or did they ever charge for calcium chloride on roads, because everybody uses the roads and they pay for, when they pay a tax to the city uses the money, and it's for tar roads and gravel roads and everything else. Well, that's what we do here too, except we get taxed extra for the calcium chloride on the gravel roads. And I believe at the last meeting, and I'll paraphrase, the conference was, yes, you've brought it up a couple times, Tom, we've talked about it. There's serious consideration about eliminating it, but nothing has been decided. And here we are. Now, granted, this cost went up and you're not passing that cost on, but what you're not doing is double taxing me on top of what you're double taxing me. So thank you, but again, you're halfway there. So I still feel strongly about the fact that we're getting billed for this individually. If you wanted to reduce my taxes or my rate so that I don't pay for all the tar roads, fine, then send me a bill for the $81 or whatever it is. But otherwise, I just continue to feel strongly that it's just not right. And maybe I can't speak for the other people, but maybe most of them don't make a big deal because it isn't a lot of money, but I just don't believe in principle it's correct. So I don't believe it should be there, period. And I haven't seen anything mentioned I'm at City Hall looking through some of these documents, and I don't see anything mentioned that it was even discussed ever that I'm aware of. Now, I'm not saying it wasn't, but I don't see any evidence of that. So, what good does it do for a resident to come to a meeting and then completely ignore it and just goes on and on? So I guess that's all I have to say, and thank you for listening.
Okay, well, thank you for your input, Tom. I think the only comment I would have regarding that is that it's not being ignored. We've talked about that very issue several times, and we have reduced the amount we're doing, or increased the amount that the city's putting in, and it's certainly an agenda item that we have that council does discuss, and we are looking at what our options are and what our long-term plans are on that. So it's not a case of you being ignored or us not understanding your position on it. It's a policy that the council has chosen, and this is how we're proceeding for now. So not that it won't change, and we appreciate your input because that does influence our thoughts.
Well, I'm going to stay on it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
You have someone else, Jessica?
We do. Just one moment here. We have a caller ending in 1885 who has raised their hand as well. We'll go ahead and unmute you and then ask that you state your name and address for the record, and we'll have you speak. You're unmuted.
Thank you, Jessica. This is Dean Bernkamp at 9310 Bechtold Road. I'm in agreement also with Tom Spitzka. While it benefits the community and the people driving down the roads and stuff, I understand where I sit. I'm 300 yards off the road. The dust doesn't get to me, so I don't understand why I'm paying that money. And again, agreeing with Tom Spitzka, it is almost like a double tax. We're already paying for the maintenance on the tarred roads and those kind of things. I know the city dumped a number of loads of gravel on the road today or yesterday. I have no say. As Tom has stated too, we don't seem to have a say. I'm on the planning commission now. I'm trying to understand why we get charged for that, and I'm in agreement there's a cost, but that should be already baked into our taxes. If I had a choice, myself and the only other person that lives on Bechtold Road between 30 and 10, and that's the Sherbers, we would not want to pay for that. And then on top of it, it's another thing. If we're paying for maintenance on tarred roads and stuff, then everybody should pay a maintenance for gravel roads in the city, not just the property owners along those gravel roads. I've kind of duplicated what Tom is saying in a different way, but if we're paying that extra money for calcium chloride, and I'm not asking for that benefit, it's kind of being forced on us. If you have questions, I'll stay on until you mute me, Jessica. Thank you guys very much for listening.
Okay, thanks for your input, Dean. Is there anyone else, Jessica?
There's no one else that's raising their hand. Mayor, I would note that we do have a public hearing
Right,
coming up later as well.
Yeah.
So we'll have an additional time for people to comment
Right.
at the public hearing.
Okay, hearing no other public comment opportunity seekers, I will move on to item 8A, which is Northeast Corcoran Water Supply Work Plan Update.
Mayor and Council, I'll turn that over to Kevin.
Thank you, Brad, and thank you, Council. We are presenting you an update on our Northeast Corcoran Water Supply Plan. I think there's a presentation that will be up shortly here. But about every 5 to 6 months, we've been back in front of you presenting the next step in the process to develop a potential water supply plan in Northeast. So we've been at it about 1.5 years, if you believe it or not, and there's some background timelines there. 3 times last year, we were in front of you for kind of like a step-by-step ask. A quick summary to date would be we do have a site acquisition purchase agreement secured for our well and water treatment site. We do have an approved permit from the DNR for a well assessment. We have participated in Northwest Metro Area Regional Water Supply Study for surface water out of the Mississippi with 3 other communities, and that's really targeting a long-term planning opportunity. And then finally, another larger component to date is the design and permitting and installation of our first municipal test well, which is currently under pumping, test pumping and water quality sampling. And I believe Kent Torvey, our city engineer with Wink, can provide an update on that at the end of my presentation. So some good stuff going on there. Next slide, please, Jess. Looking ahead, quarter 2, excuse me, year 2020, we're basically finalizing the well capacity and water quality analysis. And then looking ahead to the final 6 months here, we're looking at a feasibility study for a water treatment and tower design that would update cost estimates and would allow us to better pursue site acquisition for a water tower storage site. So those 3 kind of go hand in hand, and that's what we're here tonight presenting. Is that's the next step in the process would be to undergo that. And then looking beyond that in quarter 4, you know, if we choose to proceed, would be the actual design of the water treatment plant and tower, the design and construction of the municipal well, the current test well that we are installing will function as a future sample well. So we're planning that out well, and so that we're not, you know, duplicating resource needs. And then in addition to that, we'd also want to start looking at a finance and staffing plan in closer detail, which would be an outcome of the feasibility study for the water treatment plant and tower design. So beyond that, there's wellhead protection plans, water supply plans, and other site plans we'd have to coordinate, and, you know, looking as early as 2022, potentially completing construction and assuming operations should the council move forward. Tonight we're here, and included in the packet was basically a scope study for the next step that we recommend, which would be to continue evaluating the water treatment plant and tower design. That estimated cost is approximately $40,000, and $15,000 that would actually go towards geotechnical investigations, primarily for the water tower site. So it could implicate cost and design and site availability. So we wanted to get that out and approved ahead of time. So looking at the budget in 2019 and 2020, we had allocated $100,000 annually for water supply planning. And to date, we had spent approximately $135,000. So even incorporating the current ask of $40,000, we're under our threshold for 2019 and 2020. So we're in real good shape there. So again, I'll let Kent jump in and update you where we're at. But tonight we are asking for you to consider a motion to approve completion of a feasibility study for water treatment and tower design. And Jess, I believe Kent's number is 7919. If you'd like to unmute him, please.
This is Kent. Can somebody verify I'm unmuted?
You are, sir. Thank you.
All right, thank you. As Kevin mentioned, we're pumping a test well on the Lothar property. And back on May 12th, we set the casing. We hit the top of what is called the FIG aquifer. That has a fancier name now, the Tunnel Wantenloch. And that was expected. It was expected to hit it a little bit earlier, but we hit it at 280. And you go into that aquifer and then you finish your casing. So we finished casing about 15 or 18 feet into the aquifer and everything's just fine. It's a 6-inch casing. So once that is set, then it rests for a couple days as the grouting sets up, and then they drill in the FIG to see what the thickness of the aquifer is. So they went down about another 150 feet, and that's probably a number that you could remember, as we've got about 150 feet of aquifer there. All results were good. And then started a 24-hour pump test, which went fine at the 250 gallon per minute range. So our ultimate well, which we'll do in this fourth quarter, will be, we've targeted 400 to 800. And that's what the FIG will produce. That's what our neighbors have. And right now we're at 250, but remember, that's a tiny well. That's a 3-inch hole. And we're gonna go with a 12-inch hole for the municipal well. So we'll be fine, meaning we're gonna hit that range of 400 to 800. To finish off the test well story, we take water quality samples, and now those are sent to the lab. Those results will be back in 2 to 4 weeks. 2 weeks for the basic parameters, another few weeks for the radium and the isotopes, some of the harder stuff. We will use that data for the feasibility study, which you're considering approval tonight. So I guess the message is everything is going per plan. Results were good as far as the amount of aquifer present, and we've taken water quality samples, and we don't expect anything abnormal out of those. So with that, I will be available to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you, Kent. Any questions from council members?
Kent, I was wondering, just to kind of move forward, about water treatment. What kind of treatment would we expect to have to do to that water coming from our new well?
If the water quality tests come back normal for this aquifer, it's a sand filtration. It's called a pressure filter. They're just big tanks, and they have layers of sand in them, and it takes out the iron and manganese. There's a certain kind of sand. If we do have a little bit of arsenic, it'll also knock down the arsenic in the drinking water too. But we're expecting a very standard level of water treatment of using pressure filters that are sand filters. And again, they're in vessels, and it's all contained within a building.
So with that sort of treatment, then would we expect that homeowners or businesses using that water would need to also have a water softener?
Correct. We are not softening, so you would still need to have a water softener. However, your incoming water is better, and your softener wouldn't function also as some iron removal and manganese removal.
Is there an option for this, for the city to do that in a way which would just be much more benign to the environment? It seems to be getting to be a pretty hot issue that individual homeowners pumping all sorts of salt into the water system is not a good thing. Is it a possibility that we could do that better?
Correct. And you're on the real leading edge of where actually wastewater treatment is going.
Yeah.
Wastewater is looking at their chlorides, and they're getting permitted or getting at least sampled by the MPCA to report their chlorides. And one of the main sources of chlorides in wastewater is our homeowner softeners. So in the future, and we've called and talked directly to Department of Health and Met Council, nobody is pointing water treatment that you should do softening now because of wastewater. However, it's on the radar, might be 5, 10, 20 years away. It'll actually be driven from the wastewater side. So we're just moving forward as we look at land and as we look at a treatment site, we'll keep in mind that someday we may be looking at expanding the softening.
Great. Yeah, I'd like that to stay on the radar and to just stay current with that, because I expect it will be a big deal. Yeah.
And Tom, I'll just jump in real quick. That's actually addressed in the scope. They will investigate some of those alternatives and cost differences on a basic level, so we can start having those conversations and what the implications would mean. So this report would start the foundation of some of those conversations, but again, there is an expense to it, and that's a factor. But certainly would want to plan for it, like Kent said.
Yep. Thank you, Kevin.
So Kevin, we will be getting some information on what the cost might be if we did want to move forward with that at this time?
Yes.
Okay, good. Any other questions?
I just had a question. So the test well we're running is a 3-inch well, and the actual well is a 12-inch well. Is it at the same depth?
Yes, we're about 100 feet away, so we would expect to hit the aquifer again at about 280 feet, and then have 150 feet of open hole. So your casing is set 15 feet into the aquifer, so you seal off what's above it. And then it's really an open hole well, which is different from homeowner wells that are typically screened up in the glacial till.
Okay. So there shouldn't be any water quality changes between the test well and the actual well.
Should not, nor should there be any differences other than a foot or two in what we're seeing, you know, where we hit the aquifer and where the bottom of the aquifer is.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, hearing none, I'll consider a motion to approve the completion of the feasibility study for the water treatment and tower design.
So moved. Second, Schultz.
All in favor signify by saying aye. Thomas, aye. Anderson.
Aye.
Latimer.
Aye.
Majewski.
Aye.
And Schultz.
Aye.
Great. Kevin and Kent, thanks a lot for a great presentation, a great job. Thanks for keeping this thing on schedule.
You're welcome.
And on budget, or
And
under
on budget.
Yes.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Okay, now we'll move on to item 8B, which is a City Hall closure extension.
Mayor and Council, this is our typical, unfortunately, regular discussion. We did close City Hall on noon on March 18th, and the current closure goes through tomorrow. At this point, staff is recommending we continue the closure through June 12th, which is the day after the next City Council meeting. We're entering phase 2 of the Stay Safe Minnesota on Monday. We do expect increased cases happening. And also we have a contractor that Jessica and Mike and a few others have worked with who will be installing the plexiglass, but that won't be done for another a week to 10 days or so. So at this point, we're requesting to continue closed through June 12th.
Any questions from council?
Where's the plexiglass being? Is that in the entry?
It'd be at the front desk, essentially. So when people are coming up to the counter, our staff would be protected.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? I'll entertain a motion to authorize staff to extend the City Hall closure as requested.
So moved. Anderson.
Second, Schultz.
Any further discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye. Thomas, aye. Anderson,
Aye.
Bodema,
Aye.
Dejewski,
Aye.
and Schultz.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Okay, now we'll move on to the new business. And at this point in time, we have public comment opportunity. Should note that item 9A is a public hearing, and people will be invited to comment in the public hearing. But you're certainly welcome to give your input on the public comment opportunity. If you'd wish to speak, dial *9 on your phone, and Jessica will put you on.
And just while Jessica is waiting for that, I guess my goal if the council's okay, we could incorporate the discussion from the previous comment period as accepted public hearing comments for dust control. So those people don't have to speak again unless they feel they really want to.
Yeah, I would assume that would be the logical way to do it, to handle it.
Jessica, anybody?
Mayor and council, at this time, I don't have anyone raising their hand, and it looks like I have just one person besides staff and commission members who's live with us at the moment, and they have not raised their hand, so we can continue.
Okay. Okay, hearing no request for public comment, we'll move on to item 9A, which is a public hearing for dust control, 2020 dust control project. At this time, I'll declare the public hearing open, and we'll accept comments from people who want to turn over to Brad.
Yeah, if I could do my brief presentation, because that might help people decide if they want to comment this as well.
Okay.
So as typical from years past, we're doing our dust control program. We're proposing it. We're looking at about 27 miles of our 34-mile or so gravel road system. And that map is shown there. Next slide, Jess. So as far as the project costs go, obviously the cost share is important. It's about $111,000 project, and the proposal this year is for the city to pick up about $74,000 of it. So we do bill roughly $36,000, and really that would be the budget impact. Whereas the city wanted to choose to put it all in the tax rolls, it would require roughly a $36,000 budget increase or levy increase at that point. As far as the cost, they are spread out. Some of the questions brought up regarding paying for things. Regarding asphalt roads, for example, typically the homeowners pay for them when they go in. It's a higher cost. And then right now the city says the first overlay is free, but the second overlay per policy is actually to assess those costs as well. So just a reminder out there. And as far as the cost for adding gravel to the roads, that's all subsidized by the city budget as well. But essentially, as mentioned, costs went up, but our billing is proposed to stay the same as last year for 2019. Next slide, Jess. We did have one email today that Jessica had been helping out the residents on Homestead Trail, and there's roughly 6 access points to this section of road. 4 of them have been made us aware through one individual that they are interested in no longer having this dust control applied. Now, for many years, this was not applied at all. Residents actually petitioned to put it on a couple years ago. I don't recall which one, and it was added to the system. And at this point, they're requesting for removal. Again, 4 of the 6 properties have apparent interest, where we're waiting on a formal petition to take place. Next slide. Next slide, Jess. So at this point, the action is to hold the public hearing, and the council could approve a motion with resolution 2040 ordering the improvement as presented. There could be a possible amendment. We could remove Homestead Trail between Rolling Hills Road and Willow Drive if a petition is submitted after the fact. And I just put a recommended date here by 4 p.m. on June 4th. And this has happened once before, where people came to the hearing, council gave them time to submit the petition, and then the council's motion said if 50% plus 1 petition removal, then we approve the removal. So that's really the discussion tonight. Hold the public hearing and then consider how you want to proceed with the improvements. That's all I have.
So at this point in time, we'll take comments for the public hearing. The public hearing is open, declared open already. So anyone wishing to give comments as part of the public hearing for the dust control, please hit *9 on your phone and Jessica will put you on.
Mayor, we do have one individual who's interested in commenting. Their phone number is ending in 1885. I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. If you can say your name and address, that'd be great. And Mayor, I would note we did receive 1 written comment as well. Brad has a copy of that and can review that as part of the public comment notes as well. So I'm going to go ahead and unmute 1885 now.
Yes, Dean Vanderkamp again, 9310 Bechtold Road. Thank you for listening. I just had one more comment about all of this. Is there a way we can change dust control to be at the request of the property owner, if you know what I mean? Previous townships I've lived in, that has been the request, where we requested dust control because of traffic, because if we live close to the road, and then paid appropriately for the amount of lineal footage put down. I have not seen that in Corcoran since I've been here the last 12 or 13 years. Just wondering if that is an option and if that would save some money on budget. I know in the past, I think there was comments that it's easier to maintain the gravel roads when there's chloride down than when there's no chloride down. But that's all I had to add. I apologize for adding into the previous comments or my previous comments, but thank you for considering them now. I thought we were talking about dust control at that time. Thanks, guys.
No problem. I guess I'll respond a little bit to that on the, well, I guess let's take all the public comments and we'll come back and respond to the comments. Is there anyone else wanting to make comments?
Mayor, at this time, no one else has commented. If Brad would like, he can summarize that one other written comment that we did receive.
Okay.
Yeah, and thank you, Jessica, for the reminder on that. It's similar to the others, I guess. I'll just read it. It says, I have no need for this treatment, and I think it is unfair to assess me $81.51 for something totally going to everyone else on this road. Please consider eliminating the process, or at least eliminating charging me for the fee for the treatment. So very similar to the comments you've heard from others today.
Okay.
At this time, there are no other folks who have raised their hand to comment.
Okay. So anyone else wishing to comment before we close the public hearing? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
So move. Dejewski.
Second, Anderson.
All in favor signify by saying aye. Thomas, aye. Anderson.
Aye.
Bodema.
Aye.
Dejewski.
Aye.
And Schultz. Mr. Schultz.
Aye.
Thank you. I guess my understanding is that right now, to respond to Mr. Verenkamp's comment about individuals, I believe we do allow individuals to request the roads in front of their houses to be done. And in general, if you're not on a collector road, unless the neighborhood has requested it, we don't do the neighborhood roads. So if you're on a neighborhood road and not on a collector road, and it's being done, it's because your neighbors did request it at one point in time to be on there. And as the folks on Homestead Trail are exercising that right to ask to be removed, that is an option to have as well. The other general comment I would give on dust control is why we charge residents. It's partly because the rationale for it is, as Brad commented on, was that people who are on paved roads have paid more they paid their money to pave the road. It's a lower maintenance cost for the paved roads than it is on gravel roads, and the paved people on paved roads are charged for the ongoing maintenance of their roads through assessments. So it's certainly discussable as far as whether we're justified in charging for the dust control, but it's not a clear-cut case of that we're charging people for maintenance on gravel roads that we're not charging people for maintenance on paved roads. Arguable as far as extent and frequency, but those are points to be looked at. Would anyone else wish to comment or have questions on the issue?
I would like to comment.
Okay, go ahead, John.
I actually get a lot of people that talk about dust control and paying for it, and we've had 3 people comment, 4 if you count Mr. Varenkamp twice.
He only gets one vote.
So I think it's worthy to talk about it. It gets discussed frequently, and I just want to kind of identify how I think about this. I was at Lake Rebecca on Saturday, and I parked my vehicle, and it was $6, and I thought in my mind, well, I pay taxes in this county. Why should I have to pay additional taxes to park here? I already paid for this thing. And the same goes for the DNR. The same goes, there are neighborhood lights or lights in neighborhoods in the city of Corcoran that the homeowner specifically that benefits from that actually pays for the electricity to that light. So it's not as if these policies don't exist in other places. So then for me, whether it's paid by the individual or the public in general, you have to identify the public benefit versus the individual benefit. And in this case, the public doesn't benefit as much from dust control as the individuals along the road. And so, in my opinion, we've sort of split the difference in the public benefits a little bit, but the homeowner benefits too. I think that then I'm left with, well, this is the policy now. Is there impetus to change? And so, to me, it'd be impossible to identify specifically who wants the benefit, who doesn't want it. You know, you turn off the machine in front of certain houses. So I'm content with the policy. I probably wouldn't change it to this, but since it's this, I don't find enough reason to change the policy to everybody, it's a taxpayer, everybody benefits kind of policy. I kind of like the fact that it's a user fee. And I think it's a simple solution, but not an easy solution. You've got to get other people to get on your side and get something in and take that says we collectively do not want dust control on our roads. And that would be a way to turn it off. Otherwise, I pay it too. I'm on Trailhaven. I feel like I benefit from it, and it would be extremely cumbersome to specifically identify who's benefit from it. And we just have done the best we can that there's a certain percentage. A lot of people benefit from it, and it is public, but also a private benefit that other people don't have to pay for the whole thing. That's where I'm at on this. I feel like it's worthy of a discussion and a explanation, even if we don't change the policy.
Okay, thanks, John. Any other comments?
I have some comments as well. I want to echo that kind of what John's been saying, and that we do hear about it a lot. I would say also that I would say I hear more positive than negative about dust control, although there's argument about whether or not, you know, we should be using the chemicals we're using and how much of those chemicals we're using. But there is a lot of benefit to the public on it. However, I guess when it comes to whether or not we should be charging for it, I've always felt that as much of the common maintenance type of things like dust control and other things for roads that we can absorb, we would. However, the reality is we're limited by budget and how much money we have. So I feel like this, however, being such a small item, I'd love to see it eliminated. And we've talked about it for a while at this point. Brad, I don't know if you have this handy or not, but I know 4 years ago when we sat down, we were talking about this very issue. And it was at a different percentage rate to what we used to pay versus what we do now. Do you have that on a chart or anything that you could pull up to see what the difference has been, how much more we have absorbed over the last 4 years or so?
I don't actually. I'm sorry, I have it handy. I could pull it together in 10 minutes probably, but I don't have it handy. I want to say last year, I don't believe we reduced the fee collected, but previous years, almost every year, we reduced the amount we were collecting by fee. I could follow up with that. Sorry.
Okay. No, I know that we have been working to whittle it away. And I mean, at this point with 38,000, I think you said, left with regard to the individual's cost, at some point we got to just bite it off. So.
And Brian, you know, that's the discussion we need to have at the budget. We made this decision at the budget process last year, and this was just the ramifications of that. But yeah, I think it's an ongoing one. We have been sympathetic to that approach, and we've been trying to increase the amount the city is paying, but on a yearly basis. But it should be done based on fairness, and I think we had a pretty good balance. Any other comments?
Yeah, I wouldn't mind commenting. I think in the fairness aspect, I think you're doing a good job by keeping the assessments level, because you're saying the benefit to the individual is not going up. The road's not changing in front of their house. Why would the benefit or the assessment go up from year over year? That said, I personally would rather see the money spent on larger, heavier gravel on the roads than dust control. When we had some complaints about Willow Larkin earlier this spring, and I drove a lot of the roads in the city, and a lot of the gravel roads just don't have the big gravel that binds these roads together on them. We're using this calcium chloride to bind the roads together. And personally, I'd rather have this 111,000 spent on gravel than on dust control. So for that, I'm going to be voting no.
Okay. Any other comments? Okay. I guess in my summary again, I guess I'll repeat myself a little bit, but I think as we're all aware, the justification for putting it on the collector roads is somewhat of a city benefit. That's why the city pays a higher percentage for the collector roads. The use of it on the neighborhood roads is because the neighborhoods want it there, and the city doesn't see a big benefit, so the city doesn't fund that. And that's just our policy, and I think it's a pretty good balance. If in general the council wants to discuss this, I think we should get as much information as we can and the upcoming budget process would be part of that discussion. So, any other final comments? Okay, I'll entertain a motion to approve the resolution 2020-40, which is the improvement of dust control treatments, with the amendment to remove Homestead Trail between Rolling Hills Road and Willow Drive if a petition is submitted by 4 p.m. on June 4th, with a majority of those accessing that road in favor of removal.
So moved, Anderson.
Second, Dejewski.
Okay, all in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Thomas, aye. Anderson,
Aye.
Bodema,
Aye.
Dejewski,
Aye.
and Schultz.
Nay.
Okay, thank you. Okay, moving on to item 9B, which is the 2021 budget expectations.
Thanks, Mayor and Council. And this is a little bit earlier discussion than normal for the budget, but trying to get ahead of this with all the different items taking place so we can start drafting it. In Corcoran, the pandemic has not slowed growth. We've had some limited hard costs, we're up to about $30,000 now from March. But so really looking for some directions so we can draft this budget and incorporate the best information we can so we can have you review it a couple times before you have to preliminary adopt it in September and then approve it finally in December. So overall looking for overall budget targets, services provided, wage adjustments, staff planning, and any other priorities from the council. And we don't need to get as detailed as let's add $36,000 for dust control unless you really feel strongly about it. It's one of those things that we can actually talk about line by line after I give you a draft budget. It's pretty easy for me to just change one number after those discussions take place. However, if you very specifically want to have a discussion, that's just fine, of course, as well. Next slide, please. So just some growth that I went over in the packet there. Ravinia itself, the first 14 editions are approved with 433 lots. The final edition, the 15th, is anticipated to come through. Bass Lake Crossing has all their editions approved, as does Bass Lake Crossing South. And Bellwether has their first 4 editions approved, and the 5th edition is actually in process of review right now. So far we've had 815 municipally served lots approved with 557 new home permits on those lots through the middle of May roughly. So what that means is even if nothing else was approved, we'd still have quite a few lots to have come in the city. And again, we just anticipate the 89 additional lots approved in 2020, with being the Bellwether and the Ravinia final editions too. Next slide. This slide looks at some of the growth we've having for both new home permits as well as the population related to those. So you can see we had a gigantic jump from 2018 where we had 67 new home permits up to 158 in 2019. For budget purposes, we anticipated 150 new homes in 2020. And I think I shared a couple weeks ago, by May 13th, we were at 88 already. So we anticipate that's going to be more than we anticipate in the budget. And then as far as population, just showing where we're estimated at, the 2019 population estimated by the Met Council is just about at 6,000. And with the new home permits coming on and lagging a bit in population, we anticipate the 2020 population being about 6,400. And then if this moves forward, we'll be about 10,000 people when we get to 2030. So just kind of showing the trend of where we're at with those 2 items there. Next slide, please. So I guess these are the categories, and I'll walk through them really quickly. Overall budget targets. Previous guidance has been to work to find ways to continue providing services for the growth while lowering the tax rate. And as shown through some of the slides in the audit, it hasn't been excessive, but we've slowly, slightly lowered the tax rate over time. Again, there's a lot of pressure from growth that requires services and staffing. As far as services provided, if we want any additional or reduced services, as far as the wage adjustment go, we just adopted a contract, a 3-year contract with the Police Officers Union, and the 2021 year has a contract of 2.75% wage adjustment, and our practice has been to follow that contract with the remainder of the staff to really handle it from a pay equity standpoint as best as possible, and want to make sure the council's okay with starting on that line. Next slide. And then the final one's staff planning. I'm not asking you to approve these individuals, but as far as our staff planning, we had looked at a police sergeant for next year, some assistants in public works, whether it's administrative assistant or something similar. The city planner would be a full year once we get that moving forward. We'd be looking at an intern to help the admin department, and then potentially contract finance assistants needed to help us as our finances just get more and more complex with all the growth. And then finally, just any other priorities of the council. So with that, I mean, happy to answer any questions. If there's no direction, that's fine. I'll just jump in and draft a budget, and you'll see it and get to tear it apart and tell me how wrong I was too. But if there is information you want to talk about, now's a good time to do it. Thank you.
And I would just make note that if you don't give input at this point in time on this, I strongly urge, even if you do give input tonight, to work with Brad if you have issues with some of these, especially with the staffing requirements and the sense of how busy you believe they are or aren't, and meet one-on-one with Brad on that to get specifics from him on things and really hold him accountable and get his input as to why he feels that he needs these positions filled. And he may have already done that, I don't know. So, but I just strongly encourage that. So having said that, does anyone have comments or questions?
I can go.
Go ahead, Tom.
You know, I'm the new guy. I haven't been through this process before, but I think that to maintain that same tax rate or lower it a bit is just fine. I think that's a great tradition that we have in Corcoran. I think our services are solid, but now we are talking about water supply changes, and that will require some additional support to do that. We also have sewer and water in Corcoran, which is new to me, you know, and that when you do new things, it requires some support to make it all work. And I think that the staff works really well. My feeling is that they work really hard, and that my experience was that Kevin has been just a tremendous asset as a city engineer. Boy, it just has worked out really, really well. And so I think that that there's some good credibility for making some sort of strategic increases to the staff size. I do have a question about the paying for it. Does the increase in tax revenue from the new development pay for the staff and the increased costs of having more roads, more people living there, more expenses on that in that way?
Sure, Mayor and Council, it's a great question with a not very easy answer, unfortunately. You know, as far as development taking place in Corcoran, we've had the developers paying their way, building their roads. So there's not that initial city investment to taking place, so that's helpful. The tax base comes on over time. So every year on January 3rd, it's the magic date or thereabouts, where the valuation of property is kind of stamped. So say a lot is platted, there's no house on it on January 3rd. The value of that property might be $50,000, so your taxes are exceptionally low because that's the valuation. The following year, it's likely completely constructed, so that's a higher valuation, but then that's used for the establishing the following year after that tax levy. So it lags 2 years essentially before you get the tax capacity from that new development. So ideally it does over time. There's been studies out there, however, that for every dollar of tax you get for residential properties, you have to provide anywhere between 80 cents and $1.10, $1.20 in services. So it also depends on what services you're going to provide as well. So ideally, yes, it pays for itself, and we try to manage that way. The developments thus far have a lot of homeowner association responsibilities that reduces our services we have to provide, so it's fairly limited. It's police, fire, snow plow, you know, administration, code enforcement, that still exists, but they take on some of those items. So kind of a long-winded answer to your question.
Oh, that's perfect, and I appreciate that answer. The one other thing would be for other priorities. We have seemed to talk over and over again about getting some industrial development, some commercial development in Corcoran, and I would like to make that a budget item to actually put some money in that drive to actually allocate some funds for recruiting some either industrial or commercial development in Corcoran. I don't think it has to be a large item, but something. And I'm done.
Okay, thanks, Tom.
Yep.
Other comments? Councilmember Wadema, let's go down the line.
Yeah, I think I like the keeping the tax rate same or down. And I think one thing we ought to pay close attention to is the budgetary impacts of development. And I think it's important that the existing residents of Corcoran don't subsidize builders. And I also think that it's important to not be builder unfriendly. So I kind of like the accounting to be a little bit more specific, but I want the budget to reflect the priority of continuing the services that we do to existing Corcoran residents.
Okay, thanks, John. Councilmember Dejewski.
I think my comments slightly echoed kind of what Tom was saying. I think, John, I'm hearing something in the background. Is that still, everybody else hearing that?
No.
As far as the rate is concerned, when we looked at the budget numbers long term, when we did our assessment earlier, we're looking at all of our projections, increasing the rate at a small amount did not increase the actual tax numbers by a lot. And I think that's important to keep in mind. That's one of the things that we specifically asked for and was added to the report, the forecast report. And so with the increase in these services, it may be necessary to increase the rate, and I'm okay with that to a certain level. But I think it should mirror the rate of growth that we talked about. And that was not the case in our forecast document either. I believe that it was far surpassing the percentage increases that were seen with population growth and services needed. So we need to make sure to keep those in line. It may go up, but in my opinion, but it may not. It shouldn't go up as much as it was projected to. The other thing that I want to comment on is I think the city is in a really good position. I mean, I think the staff has presented itself well. They are doing excellent work, and we need to acknowledge that and what they do, and also how they are compensated. And then they also have to be justifiable. So, for example, on the staff planning sheet, we've got a police sergeant. Does it make sense to have a police sergeant, or does it make sense to have more officers at a lower rate, or an officer instead of a sergeant? I know that there are, obviously different compensation for that, and does that offset the budget? Do we need all of these, like the intern and the administrative assistant? Is that necessary right now, or is it not? Or I don't know, but I'm just asking for, when this stuff comes before us with the budget, I would ask that there would be some justification for those. And not as simple as, yeah, we're busy. I get that. We're all very, very busy. That's just a reality. And unfortunately, if the economy goes down, we're going to continue to be busy, and we may not have the money to increase staff. So what do we do? And I think that you guys are great at balancing that. And you're also great at throwing out, hey, this is ideally what we'd like. And so, just to have a plan B to say, okay, here's our, if we had to choose, this is the priority of those positions. Is it the planner first because of all of these increased needs in the community and its development? That might make the most sense, and then follow that afterwards. I don't know. So those are kind of the thoughts that I had in looking this over. Just general thoughts. Obviously, as more comes before us, we'll get more detailed. But that's my initial thought.
Thanks, Brian. Councilmember Schultz.
Yeah, thank you. I echo a lot of the same sentiment that has already been spoken. one thing I would have to say is that, you know, we can control the rate. We can't control our tax base coming in. That's just what it is. But it would be nice if we get some budget expectations of the amount of new revenue coming in at the same tax rate for things that are coming online. So things that were in development 2 years ago. I think, I hate throwing this out there, but there's a lot of people in the city that are probably hurting right now because of this COVID thing. So even if the tax rate stayed the same, they're going to have a hard time paying for their taxes and whatnot. So I think we need to be cognizant of that while still providing the same level of service we can, whether if we have to add staff to create some capacity to still provide those services, that's understandable. But I think we need to do our best to try to keep our tax rate the same. We don't have any effect on any other taxing entities within our city or the valuations of those homes within our city, but we can control our tax rate that's applied to those people. So I think we need to think about that. To Brian's point, I do agree with him about staffing. I had a question about the police sergeant. Is that something we can actually, you know, look to promote within the city, or would we actually be looking at an addition at the sergeant level? You know, could we promote someone to a sergeant and then hire a patrol officer to fill that position, that other position? Those are kind of my questions too, and what the budget impact's going to be. Things that are budget neutral, additional items that we need to do, I'm more than fine with, but when we're starting to talk about increasing the tax rate to pay for things, it's going to get a little harder pill to swallow. So any projections you can throw out there as far as new revenue coming in from growth to offset the additional items you want to add, I think that'd be beneficial to see. So.
Sure. And Mayor and Council, and Matt's on the phone, but we can get to more in detail when we get into the actual budget itself. But the specific need for the sergeant, just briefly, is that right now, mostly Matt, but also Ryan are on call 24/7. Anything that comes up with a police officer, they have to call Matt and Ryan. And a sergeant would offer a tier of a kind of a semi-supervisory position that could answer most questions, be responsible for making most decisions. As our population has increased, the workload increases, and as does the calls. And it's been draining for 5 years, you know, for Matt to take those calls at nighttime, and for Ryan, what is he at, 26, 7 years or whatnot, but only a few as lieutenant, I should say. So that's the kind of change in tier, and ideally, ideally we'd have people in tow who could make that jump up, but that'd be part of the process discussion. So if there's further discussions or questions, I can get Matt here to answer them. Otherwise, we'll bring that information to you, absolutely.
Okay, yeah, and my general feedback to Brad has been that I'm very supportive of an understanding of the need for these people and for the additions. Anything that causes the tax rate to increase significantly, I'm not going to look at decimal points and say if we're a tenth of a percent up or not. That's not going to bother me a lot. But if we can't control our tax rate and we're adding these things in, then it's going to take some real justification for it, and that's where the pushback will come from me. And I don't want to focus just on a number or a statistic, but that's the easy one that we have to look at and to kind of set as a barometer, and that's my starting point. But which I think I'm echoing pretty much what the council said. So, any further comment?
Yeah, I had one further comment I forgot to mention, and that is in these plans in general, I want to make sure that we are including some of the public safety plan work that we talked about. In specific, the medical, on-call team, and also the reality that if we don't start now budgeting for the need for fire down the road, we're not going to be able to do anything with it once we need it desperately. So we've got to be setting aside some funds to be able to build that over time, starting now, really, is what we all came to the conclusion about. there wasn't any debate on that really either way. It was just, if we're going to do this, we've got to start sooner rather than later, or it's never going to happen. But some of the immediate goals did have budgetary implications. I just want to make sure that those are built into this plan as well. And just like I said, the one that comes top of mind is the medical team.
Thanks, Brian. Anything else? Okay.
Thank you, Brian, for bringing that up.
Yeah. Again, I encourage everyone to get a hold of Brad and to go over these items and make sure that you've communicated what your concerns are and give him a chance to defend his position or to be talked out of it so that he can do as much specific planning as he needs to come up with a budget. So.
Thank you.
Okay. I don't think we have to take any action on that. We're just looking for feedback. Okay, so item 9C, which was added, is the absentee voting issue.
Excellent. Thanks, Mayor and Council. So tonight, before you, I'm just wanting to bring a potential service level change that we're seeing with the pandemic related to elections. Over the past several, as far as I know, we've had absentee voting at Corcoran City Hall in person for many years. And the county has asked whether or not any of the cities in Hennepin County would like to continue being polling absentee in-person polling locations. Speaking with some of the other surrounding communities, there's been just a lot of discussion on whether or not we should have in-person absentee voting here during the statewide primary here in August. So really that's the big question before us. If we decide that we would like to do reduced voting, we could do it the 7 days before, or we could decide not to offer any in-person absentee voting. Really, it just is an opportunity for us to look at a different service module for at least the primary and limit those interactions during the initial part of absentee voting, which is the 46-day period before voting. We do have a lot of contact with individuals because we have to do the application, give voting materials, and then witness voting materials at the end of the process. So there's a few additional steps during the first 39 days or so of the absentee voting period. So with that, staff really would recommend at this time to have us look at doing a reduced in-person absentee for the 7 days before the election rather than the full term, especially with the peak right now for COVID anticipated somewhere between mid-June and mid-August here. So that would put us in prime time for voting. So we're really looking for some feedback and some blessing from council to move forward with that. Hennepin County would still provide in-person at their site in downtown, as well as mail-in voting. One important piece to note about absentee voting in the presidential primary years is we only get about 10% of people on average to participate. In 2016, actually, we only had 2 absentee ballots here at City Hall during that presidential primary year election. So really, it's just a service level change. We wanted to make sure that we are comfortable with council doing that. I would anticipate no changes to in-person absentee voting for the general election. I think we do see a lot of turnout and continues to have absentee be very popular, at least for the general elections. So with that, I would open up any questions, but at this time we'd recommend doing that shortened 7 days before the election balloting. timeline.
Okay, any questions from council?
I have some questions on
Sure.
this. If there's such a low number of individuals that are going to take advantage of this, why is it so important to limit it? I'm very hesitant to limit anything with regard to voting. I'm happy to hear you say that you don't want to limit anything with regard to the general election, but I think this year the primary is going to be a bigger deal than it was, only because it hasn't happened, historically until now in the same way. And one of the most basic rights for an individual is voting. And just to say that it's available downtown Minneapolis doesn't really give a lot of people the option. A lot of people don't want to go downtown, especially with everything that's going on right now. They might be scared to go downtown. There's a lot of things that will weigh into that decision, and they could absentee vote, through mail. But it's one of the most basic functions of government, and I'm very, very hesitant to limit what we offer, especially when you're saying there are very few people that are going to take advantage of it. So it shouldn't impact us tremendously anyway.
Thanks, Brian, for that. We certainly could be open for voting. I think the idea behind limiting it, we would not limit any. It would not impact mail-in absentee voting. The county is also looking at additional ways for people to drop off ballots, but that process hasn't been finalized. I think our perspective on it really was just to limit the amount of people coming into City Hall and having people come into City Hall during that peak time was really the idea behind it. Certainly, we could be open for it. There's no real changes for the city other than just limiting our staff. I know Hennepin County is really pushing the mail absentee balloting just to limit interactions. So that's something that they're pushing, and as staff here, we want people to understand how they can vote. With the 7 days before the election, it just really does limit our interaction with. It provides a little less interaction with folks, but certainly it's something that we could look at doing. It's just
Jess, just jump in on that as well. I mean, one of the issues is if we commit to this, we are saying that City Hall is going to be open 8 to 4 Monday through Friday starting June 26th. And if the peak does come through and if there are conditions, we're then going to ask you at that time, I guess, to stop voting in person. So we're playing a little bit of fire here. If we are open, we have to have a staff at City Hall 40 hours a week. And right now, we're trying not to do that. No one's at City Hall 40 hours a week, not even close. So that's the other hard part of that consideration. You're right. We kick this around. This is one of the core components of government, and I get that 100%. The other part, I think, Jazz, we don't know the timeline where we have to make that decision. Or do you now?
I do now. As of today, they need to know by June 8th. So that would be before our next council meeting, which limits some of our availability to do that because I have to order ballots by June 6th. So if we are open, I will need to order ballots prior to that. So that's another consideration there as well.
Yeah, I guess, my position on this is I hesitate to even call it that we're limiting the voting to 7 days. We're leaving absentee voting open for 7 days, and I agree voting is a basic right, but voting is a basic responsibility too. And I think if people can't make the effort to meet a pretty darn open schedule and what 3 or 4 different ways to do it, then I wonder why they need more accommodation than that. So I'm very, very much supportive of limiting our exposure to 7 days. But I don't know what the rest of the council. Other comments?
Mr. Mayor, and Jessica, I must have failed civics. It was so long ago. Can you just do a quick spin of the myriad of ways that you can now cast a ballot?
Sure. So starting the 46 days before the election, you
Okay.
can apply for an absentee ballot. You can do that either via mail. You can send an application via email to myself. You can send it to the county. Any of those ways will get a ballot to you. You can even apply online to get a ballot sent to you. It would be sent to you by Hennepin County. Hennepin County takes on the main job of providing the mail-in absentee balloting. So they mail out everything to people, and everything comes back to Hennepin County. Our process really has just been to be a satellite location for that. So in a non-pandemic year, we would be open 46 days in advance. We are required, if we are open, for either the 40 we either have to be open for our regular business hours for those 46 days or not, or the 7 days or not at all. So those are our kind of options with voting. But otherwise, besides mail-in, like I said, you can come in person to those locations as well. Those are the two main ways to absentee vote. There are actually a couple other ways. We don't have healthcare care facility voting. Thank goodness, because that's a lot more work. But we also do have agent delivery. So the last 7 days before the election, someone can come into City Hall, bring a ballot to someone, and have it delivered. So you can designate an agent as well. So those are really the main ways of absentee voting.
So,
No, go ahead.
What changes 7 days before?
So 7 days before, we go from absentee voting, where you fill out an application,
Okay.
You get your ballot. Your ballot goes in a secrecy envelope,
Yeah,
inside
okay.
a witness envelope, and then it comes back to staff to be witnessed and signed. And then that ballot then has to get couriered to Hennepin County and then counted at Hennepin County prior to the election. The last 7 days, we enter into what we refer to as direct balloting, which allows us to have folks complete their application. We give them their ballot, and they can enter it directly into the ballot counter, which allows one last touch by staff here, as well as one last touch by the county staff as well.
Okay. All right. That's really helpful. So there are several ways to do a mail-in ballot 46 days prior to the election, and then it'd be the usual way of doing the early ballot a week before. Okay, I guess I want to be really sensitive to any claim that we were kind of discouraging people to vote. I'm feeling like we're pretty well covered by making the change. Yeah.
And Tom, thank you for noting that. We don't want to discourage people to vote. We just really, this would be a service level change in how we are providing that and how the county is providing that. Speaking with surrounding communities, I know several of them are looking at the reduced option. Even one very large city was looking at potentially offering no in-person absentee voting. So it's really up to the cities and county to kind of decide what that appropriate level is. And I would anticipate, like I said, again, with the general, us having being open for that entire term.
Thank you very much.
Other
I
comments?
know John hasn't shared yet, but I wanted to chime back in here on one thing that I also considered. It's actually there's another side to this, in that because of this COVID thing, it would actually in some ways make more sense to be open the longer period of time. Because if that peak does happen right during that time frame, and we're forced to shut down City Hall, then people did not have that opportunity. Whereas if we have the longer period open, People would be able to come in earlier if they're more comfortable with that before the peak hits, or some other time. It just creates a lot more flexibility for a vote to be submitted in person. If that week, I mean, we're assuming that that week is still going to work, and that's a huge assumption at this point, and it may even have to shut down. So then now we've basically said there's no option for that. So it's just another way to look at it. And I think, again, we're just trying to do everything we can to make sure that people have the opportunity to vote.
And Brian, to that point, I do not believe legally we could not be open for voting those last 7 days. If even in a pandemic, I'd have to verify with our city attorney on whether or not we'd be able to shut down during that. That's something I can certainly look into, though.
Because they were talking about at the national level and everything for this, even October and November elections, all these different options where people can do all sorts of jerry-rigging for ballots. And so I just don't want to be a part of that.
Yep.
So
certainly, and I appreciate that. We are just trying to find a good balance, and I'm not sure what the best answer is, but this is kind of the direction we were looking at this point.
Okay,
yep.
Any other comments, questions?
I know John didn't get a chance to chime in.
Yeah, it's a very simple question. Can you drop off a ballot at City Hall to be mailed to Hennepin County? Or did you already answer that question?
That's a great question, John. If you get a ballot mailed to you, it comes prepaid postage back to Hennepin County, and it already has the address labels ready to go.
But can you get one at City Hall that you bring back to City Hall and they mail it and you mail it to Hennepin County, or is that not how it works?
So you could, during in-person absentee voting, get a ballot here and take it with you and have it mailed back. If we're open the entire period, if we're open the 7 days before, you would just get that ballot and vote it here through the direct. You can actually, during those last 7 days, take with a ballot. You just want to account for the fact that if you're mailing it back, the time frame it takes to mail that back.
Fair. Okay. And the reason, I know you've said this and I apologize, but can you re-articulate specifically why we would limit the number of days that they can do that at City Hall?
Sure. I think the reason we were looking at potentially changing the time period for the state primary election is related to limiting interactions with folks at City Hall.
Okay, so that's the state primary, but
yes,
not
we're talking about the state primary
election.
The general election. We have no guidance on that, and at this point, I would not recommend that we limit in-person absentee voting during.
Right now,
okay.
Right now, we're talking about the primary.
Yep, just the primary, and the county does not anticipate any changes to the in-person absentee voting at City Hall during the general election. It's become really popular. The last week of the voting in 2018, we had almost 10% of people vote in person for the 2018 general election. So
now is primary election a constitutional election?
Can you let me know what you mean by constitutional?
Like, are they
required? Yes.
Yeah, like the presidential is required, and the primaries are Minnesota constitutionally required election.
I can't speak to if it's in the Constitution, but it's a required election that we must hold.
Okay.
It might be in state law. I just don't know that
I don't know the answer
statute
to
off the
that,
top of
but
my head.
I think that it's a party thing. Whether we have it or not, it's more of a party thing. And so I'm more inclined to, I agree with Brian that, we can't restrict people's opportunity to vote, but being that it's a primary, I have no problem with restricting that to whatever you feel is prescribed. And I think there's ample opportunity for people that want to vote in a primary election to do so. So, long story, it's a really important constitutional question, so I want to give it its due, and I think that we're being more than sufficient for a primary.
Good, thanks, John. Alan, did you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I guess I had a couple questions. Sure. With the mail-in ballot, they have to request a mail-in ballot from the county, correct? Is it?
Yes.
Do they have the ability to request that via phone, or is it all online, email?
They can do online, fax, email, and I can verify if there is if there is a dial option. But
okay.
That's a great question. I have not been asked that before.
Yeah, because I think that would be the only limiting factor for those people that don't have access to email or internet if they can't do a dial-in. But it would seem to me that a dial-in would be an option because there's a lot of rural areas where mail-in ballots are the only option. I believe my parents' township, they don't even have in-person voting where they live. It's all mail-in in that county, even in general elections. Which leads me to my point, do we even need to have to hold a primary in-person election in our city? Are we required to do that, or can we have all mail-in voting through the state?
That's a great question. Alan, we are more than 500 people, so we're not allowed to do an all mail-in.
Okay.
So,
okay. With regards to mail-in, what is the last date that somebody can actually request it and logistically get a ballot in hand and be able to return it back to the county to be counted? I'm assuming there's a cutoff period at some point.
They don't actually cut off the ability to get ballots mailed. But generally, we like to tell people a week before. So I will be taking over the front page of the newsletter, this newsletter and next newsletter, to inform people how they can vote via absentee, how they can vote on election day, and what we're doing to keep people safe with COVID. So we will be doing a lot of communications related to how to vote and what we're doing to help people vote related to both.
So can somebody actually request from the county a mail-in vote ballot on the actual election day?
No.
No?
Not on election day. Election day.
I mean, how many days before? Okay.
Yep.
So it could be that they could do it the day before, and their vote could be counted up to a week after the election, almost till the election is certified.
Absentee. This year they changed the regulations related to absentee, so absentee ballots can be counted until 2 days after the election.
Okay. I mean, that's the only real limitation factor is if people miss that mail-in window and don't come in to do in-person voting.
But we're available during that 7 days.
Yeah, we're available for that 7 days. I have no problem limiting it to 7 days. Like you said, there's so many options, and I'd be really curious to know if they have the ability to request a ballot by phone, because a by phone ballot takes away concerns of a lot of people of low income that don't have access to internet.
Yeah.
Sure. And
okay.
Alan, I'm looking at the state's information, and I don't see They do have a phone number, so I
That's-
can verify
Maybe
that.
you can look it up. It's not germane to
No.
this issue in any case, but it's an interesting fact to it, I guess. But okay, I'll entertain a motion to authorize staff to limit the absentee voting to 7 days prior to the election as requested.
So move, Schultz.
Second, Anderson.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Thomas, aye. Anderson,
Aye.
Bodema,
Aye.
Dejewski,
Hey,
Schultz.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Jessica.
Thank you all.
Okay, item 9G. Brad, did you want to cover that?
Yeah, Mayor and Council, and I do have a brief slide. Jess, if you want to pull it up, but essentially I've been working with the city attorney to talk through phase 2 with the Governor's Stay Safe Minnesota, which does allow bars and restaurants to open up on Monday, June 1st, with outdoor seating, a limited capacity up to 50 people total. And I've went out to Mama G's on Tuesday, met distance with Greg out there. I've been talking with Christy at the stanchion. And with the city attorney's understanding, I do not have the authority to work with these these owners to authorize them to open up with site plans that are altered. So for example, Mama G's is fine. They have plenty of outdoor space. If you've been there, they can distance quite well. The stanchion cannot. They would need to put a tent outside, fence in some areas, and typically that's a site plan amendment that would require planning commission, council approval. They might even need variances. So for that specific authority needed, I need the ability from the council to grant regulatory flexibility. So city attorney and I talked about that, but then we talked about, well, what's going to be the next thing down the list? And so this is a long resolution. I emailed it out, I believe just today, but it really is vague that allows me the authority to approve different conditions for different circumstances. So I'm thinking about, say, commercial door needs to ramp up operations, but they can't distance, so they want to have a tent up for some of their products. That'd be a site plan amendment type thing. So it's not just bars and restaurants. There's probably 25 things I'm not even thinking of yet. So the resolution allows for that through October 31st, unless extended or shortened by the council. It does also require me to submit reports back to the council on what I've done, and that's typically how I've been operating anyway. I bring in the council what's going on, what is taking place, what I've authorized, and you can rescind or fire me essentially at any meeting with 3 votes. So looking for this authority so I can help some businesses open up. I talked to Christy at the stanchion today. She's not thinking of opening up on Monday. She's going to wait and see how the first week or so goes, but she might want to and need to open up as well. So really we can't wait on council meeting schedule to keep businesses closed in my mind. So I'm requesting this authority.
Any questions from council? Okay. I think the biggest thing I note on here that's makes me feel comfortable with it is that the approvals are not forever, and we can shut them down pretty much at our own will, I guess. And the Brad's authority only goes to October 31st. So I'm comfortable with it. I think we need the flexibility during these times in order to respond to the needs that are out there. Any other comments?
Yeah, I appreciate that. So sorry, Brian. Mine's short. I'm fine with it. I think we got to get things moving.
Yep. Okay, I'll entertain them.
I had, well, I can do it after your motion and discussion time. That's fine.
I'm sorry, Brian, what did you?
I can do it during the discussion portion.
Okay, I'll entertain a motion to.
Wait, no, I can't because it has to be part of this motion. Now I think about it. The couple of things that I was hesitant about on this is that anytime we are granting additional power to, that has to be limited, and it is, but there are a couple of things that are not as clear as I'd like them to be. One is in item number 2, it says city administrators are authorized to grant includes, but it's not limited to. So essentially it lays out these things that he's able to do, but then it says, but it's not limited to these things. So I don't understand that. That's contradictory to me. If you want to lay out the powers that they can do, that's great. But then throwing in, but is not limited to, says to me that it's a little loose. The other thing is on item number 7, the city administrator shall submit 1 or more reports to the city council. Now, Brad is excellent at this, but again, we don't know what's going to happen in the near future. I would like that to be more clear in that it shall submit a report to at each city council meeting identifying any changes that have been executed. That way, it's not one report at the end of, in October that says, oh, by the way, I did these things. And I'm not saying, Brad, that you would do that. I think you know that, but precedent-wise, this just, I don't like having something like that unclear. So I would move that we move forward with this, but with the language change for item number 7, that they shall submit reports at each city council meeting identifying any changes that were executed by the city administrator. So that way, the not limited to is taken care of because he would report anything that's been done.
Yeah. So at every council meeting, he would report.
Correct.
Okay.
So Mayor and Council could read, the city administrator shall submit a report to the city council identifying the businesses granted regulatory flexibility and the types of flexibility granted at the next meeting following the approval.
Correct.
Would that be sufficient?
Yep.
Okay. And I think as far as the overreach issue, Brian, I think it's a good point. My point would be that I think item 6 pretty well takes care of that because the council can just retract anything that's put out there in any case. So, and then with your other addition of getting a report every council meeting would probably handle that.
Yep.
Good catches. Okay, now I'll entertain a motion to approve resolution 2020-42.
With the, I would move that with the additions.
With the additions
just
that
identified.
articulated, yes.
So moved, or seconded, Schultz.
Okay, any further discussion? All in favor of the motion as modified, for the resolution as modified, signify by saying aye. Thomas, aye. Anderson?
Aye.
Bodema?
Aye.
Dejewski?
Aye.
And Schultz?
Aye.
Okay, thanks. Thank you, Brett.
Thanks for your support. I think it's important for us to help these businesses out, and I can be flexible in doing so. And I know where y'all stand pretty well, so I'll be okay with these powers. I won't overreach.
And he likes his job too, so I think he'll.
I do like my job.
Cautious. Okay. Okay, we're on to item 10 now at planning business, and at this point in time, we'll take public comment.
Actually, Mr. Mayor, sorry, one brief item on this 2020 staffing on 9E.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And I'll be really, really quick.
Go ahead.
Just want to make the council aware, I do currently have the authority to push forward with the hiring processes for the vacancy for the maintenance worker as well as the city planner, but a lot has changed since then. It's this time with nothing slowing down at this point. We really need to get these processes moving forward. So I'm just looking for either consensus or a blessing that the council supports me posting these positions and moving forward, because I hate to go through a full process and then come back to you guys with a recommended candidate and you'd say, well, I really don't think we should move forward with this process. So looking for a blessing to move forward with the city planner process as well as the maintenance worker process again.
So the question is anybody, are any of the council members wanting to limit the approvals that we previously made? Not putting that in the negative. I'm just saying that's a discussion point.
Correct. Thank you.
We've already budgeted for them, correct?
Correct.
I have no problem with it.
And with me.
I'm good.
And he's obviously will be making a final approval when the hires are made, and it's not the final. So you just needed comments on that, right, Brad?
Correct. Thank you. I'm good.
Okay. Okay. Now we will move on to item 10, the planning business, and we will take public comments from anyone who wishes to. Please dial *9 on your phone, and Jessica will put you on
Thank you, Mayor. We do have one individual who has raised their hand. Individual and phone number ending in 1885. I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. Feel free to state your name and address and speak.
Hello, Dean Berncamp again, 9310 Bechtold Road. Thank you for listening, guys. Crazy times right now. Specifically on this development, I have just two concerns. I'm actually one of the neighbors. I'm in the very southwest corner of this property. So the biggest concern that I have, and that other people or other neighbors around here have told me about, is on page 258 of the presentation. It shows a point of dedicate road on Bechtold on the far western part of this property, and it's hooked to outlet C. I want to make sure that the council knows and understands that that is all wetland, so to speak. It's yes, it's a ditch, but it's a lot of water there. And to have a dedicated road there, I'd really not like to have access to any of this property off that road unless a very, very severe design change on all of these lots. The second thing that I'm concerned about, and one of our planning commissioners brought it up, is there's no design for the houses in this development. While I know and I understand there's no sewer and water, everything will be septic systems and well waters. How is it going to look? I see that where the houses are, I see where possible septics are, but it sounded like in the planning commission that this would be a property, they sell the property to independent builders, and then the independent builders can put whatever. So would we have castles? I'm going to use that loosely, very fancy, very beautiful homes. Are we going to have ranch style homes? Is there a design there that we could put in place, some type of design requirement so it looks like it belongs instead of just a willy-nilly puzzle, if that makes sense? Otherwise, if you haven't been out to this property, it is a farm field. One of the other concerns that we talked about in the planning commission was all these wetlands are identified as wetlands in the proposal, but right now all of these wetlands are essentially being plowed and planted. So I'm a little concerned about runoff and where it's going to go and what's going to happen. I'm concerned about housing designs or how this development will look, what the houses will look like, and I'd really like no access, if at all possible, to Bechtold Road on the west side of this property, and that's all I have.
Okay, thank you. Is anyone else, Jessica?
No.
Okay. Okay, so we'll move on to item 10A, which is open space and preservation plat for Paulson Farms.
That'll be Kendra, who's joining us from Hugo to Corcoran now.
Jess, will you pull up my presentation for me? And we'll work through. It is an open space preservation plat. It's actually the first one since we updated the ordinance requirements for open space preservation plats. And frankly, much of the discussion at the Planning Commission related to the less about the project and more about what the ordinance does or does not say. So we'll talk a little bit about that at the end. This is a preliminary plat. Open space preservation plats can be done by right by a preliminary plat. It does not require a PUD. It does not require a CUP anymore. It's an opportunity for landowners to maximize their building rights and in exchange preserve open space until sewer and water, municipal sewer and water are available in the future. So this property is zoned rural residential. It's an 83-acre site that will be divided into 4 outlots and 20 lots. 50% of the land will be preserved as open space as required by the ordinance, and half of that, slightly more in this case, half of that is open space. There are a couple changes that we are going to make to the plan, requiring as conditions that'll tweak those numbers a little bit, but I believe that even after those changes, it will still comply. Next slide. The Planning Commission held a public hearing on May 7th and voted 4-1 to recommend approval. And there was a lot of discussion at the Planning Commission about the project details. There was no one present to speak on the item. However, there was an email that was submitted that raised concerns about county road traffic. The public safety crew did provide a memo, which is in the packet as well. The Planning Commission really expressed some concerns, frankly, that the details of the open space maintenance were not provided. As I noted in the staff report, we require them to tell us how they're going to deal with it, but we don't require the final details until the final plat comes in. And I think that's something that certainly the council could direct staff as a separate item to amend in the ordinance if you're not comfortable with what you're seeing with the plans tonight related to the details of the open space maintenance plan, HOA, covenants and restrictions and those kinds of things. That was, I think, the reason that we had the no vote, but others on the commission expressed that same concern about, gee, I wish I could see what the covenant said and what the open space documents said. So Parks Commission, excuse me, looked at this last week and voted 6-0 to recommend approval of cash in lieu of land for the 20 lots. Next slide. This is the property, and this is the Hennepin County wetland delineation map. We actually did get a delineation that was reviewed and approved for the site. Slightly different boundaries, but it gives you a sense of what's happening. There is access to the site right now only from County Road 30. No access is planned now or in the future to Bechtold Road. But because it abuts that right-of-way, we will take right-of-way to allow for future improvements to Bechtold. There are 2 future road connections to the east and 1 to the south that we'll talk about later, though. Next slide. There are 10 development rights on the property today, which would allow the developer to do the open space preservation plat and get 20 lots. The maximum lot size is 4 acres, and the lots range from just over 1 to 4 acres in size. There are 4 outlots proposed around the perimeter of the site, and those are not allowed to be developed. A covenant needs to be placed on there to restrict development until sewer and water are provided. Outlots A, C, and D are proposed to be owned by the homeowners association, and they will be restored as native prairie and natural areas. But Outlot B would be retained by the developer, and he has indicated that he is planning to continue to farm that land, at least the eastern part of that land as it is now, which is allowed under the ordinance. Next slide. So you can see on the north part of the site is where all of the homes are planned. The street comes in off of County Road 30, goes south. There's a cul-de-sac that goes west from there, but does not extend to Bechtold Road. And because of the location of that lot there and Outlot C behind it, will not be able to extend out to Bechtold. But the road that goes south, you can see there's a future road shown on the plan going east up north, and that road up north of the pond there is just shown as a future road. We're requiring a condition that it actually be platted as right-of-way, and that's where I say that's going to change the numbers of the open space a little bit, but that needs to be platted as right-of-way to the east to allow those residents to know that that road could extend to the adjacent property. Then there's a future road that's shown going south and ending in 2 different cul-de-sacs. That eastern cul-de-sac needs to be redrawn to show that it will extend to the south property line and ultimately down to the county road a couple parcels down. It's not being platted now, but the ghost plat needs to show that future connection so that everybody understands that that road will, at some future date, go through or is planned to go through. You can also see on this image the delineated wetland. The green is the buffer around the wetlands. Those will be protected. There'll be setbacks from those buffers. And that brown lasso looking thing down in the southwest corner, that is a trail that's proposed by the developer, a mode trail that would provide access to a portion of Outlot B for resident use. We've added a condition though, that trail just dead ends up between lots 7 and 8, and they need to provide some way for it to connect to a public street so it's usable. Next slide, Jess. One of the other things that the Planning Commission struggled with a little bit is that the ordinance has design goals that there are 9 items that it says developers should try to comply with. We talked about this when we updated the ordinance. The 2004 ordinance had a requirement that you meet a certain number of these, and we eliminated that requirement, and the council felt that just providing the guidance made sense rather than being prescriptive, just providing goals. The Planning Commission was somewhat frustrated. I think you heard, you know, we don't have an architectural theme, but we're not required to have an architectural theme. We do have at least 50% of the lots abutting open space, but we don't have a central focal point the way this particular thing is laid out. However, we do preserve natural resources, we do preserve views, and we do locate septic systems on suitable soils. So again, it's a way to check how the development is meeting our goals, but it's not a requirement that a certain number be met. Next slide. This image shows the open space that the colors are a little bit hard to read on the screen, but it gives you a sense of the green is the lot areas and the pinks, purples, and yellows are the open space areas. In the top, Jessica, where the there's a transmission line that runs east and west right there. And so we did talk a little bit about the fact that that one lot really is somewhat restricted by that transmission line. The easement restrictions really do limit the usability of that lot. So we did include requirements that the HOA documents are very clear to that buyer about how that land can be used and not used. So I just wanted to point that out. Next slide. On the south side of the lots, there is an existing ditch between basically the lots and the open space. And as the trail will cross that ditch, and it's possible that to farm the property, they may need to cross that ditch. Engineering has noted some concerns about the existing situation of that ditch, so some stabilization may be required. We need more information from the developer about how those ditch crossings will occur. I think that's something that Dean was referencing a little bit tonight, certainly talk more about it at the Planning Commission, but something we're aware of and is addressed in conditions from the city engineer. Stormwater management is important. There are a lot of wetlands on site. A lot of them are farmed today, and as that transitions away from farming to development, how the wetlands get treated and how stormwater management gets handled with the ditch and the wetlands on site is important. Final design still needs to be completed and reviewed for compliance with local watershed and state rules. We already talked a little bit about park. It's park dedication in cash, but as an amenity, the HOA will have a wood chip trail in Outlot B. But again, we want to make sure they can actually use it, so we want to show how they get access. Next slide. Hennepin County has reviewed and provided comments on this. There will be improvements required to County Road 30. In typical fashion, the city will design and construct those road improvements, turn lanes, with developer financing. That red bubble shows the area of the transmission line, and then you can see a couple of red arrows showing where the 2 future streets need to connect to the east and the south as well. Next slide. So with that, we do recommend adoption of Resolution 2038 as recommended by the Planning Commission. And I'm happy to answer any questions, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, any questions from council?
The
Go ahead, Al.
So we're just looking at the preliminary plot, and then we'll only look at the final plot with this one, right? Since there's no, we're so used to PUDs where we're looking at all that PUD documentation, and there's different reviews on what's coming into the point of the Planning Commission. There's no documentation as more detailed information. So if we accept the preliminary plot now, when they come in with the final plot, our discretion is only related to how much the final plot changed from the preliminary plot, right? So if we get additional details that we aren't comfortable with, at that point, we don't have a whole lot to say as long as the plot didn't change, correct?
Sort of. We do want to make sure that we've got conditions in the resolution that are clear because they will have to meet any of those conditions in the resolution as well. So it's not just about matching up the lot lines, which is why we have conditions in there requiring changes to the plans and requiring review and approval of the preservation, restoration, and management plans, for example. So it's a little bit of both. Preliminary plats and final plats, the city council has very little discretion. If it complies with the ordinance requirements, you kind of have to approve it. But there are some things that we can attach conditions to within the realm of the ordinance standards, not above and beyond. It's not a PUD, so we can't ask for higher architecture than is in the code. But we can make sure that we get the details about how the open space will be maintained and make sure it complies with the ordinance standards, for example.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I had a couple questions. The traffic concerns, I saw that public safety submitted as a part of this, their response. Does it address the traffic issues that the resident highlighted? I mean, does it sufficiently address that concern, I guess?
So I can speak to that if you'd like, Kendra. Yes.
Yes.
So we took a look at the intersection. Obviously, the deeper traffic analysis happens from the traffic engineers, but wanted to take a look at the snapshot of the residents' concern with traffic and what we've seen from our at least reported experience. The specific complaint from the resident was at High Bluff in County 30. We did find some mostly traffic initiated stuff from the officers at that, but we actually found more substantive concerns at Bechtold and 30, which is still that same general area. Those two intersections are close to each other, to try and get an idea of what traffic issues we were seeing in that area. So we provided a brief summary of those, and you saw that in that analysis in there, and that's why the analysis is based on Bechtold and 30. We did take a separate look at High Bluff and 30, and really, I mean, just recommended that improvements be considered if there was going to be any change in the traffic or increase in traffic at that intersection.
Okay. And then the second question I had, Kendra, is more directed to you, in that the ghost plat that's on the south end of this, I don't understand how that can be platted when you've got so much, it appears to me to be wetland over that same space, right? So if you look, I'm looking at Wink's figure 1 and figure 2 and comparing them to the two of them, in that the first one shows that we're going to have a bunch of lots to the east of Outlot B, or maybe that's part of Outlot B, I'm not quite sure. And then if you look at figure 2, it looks like there's a big section of almost like a lake or river there. So how do those two things align and jive with this?
Yeah, I don't really like Wenk's figure number 2 because it doesn't reflect the wetland delineation. that's actually approved. So it suggests that there's wetland there that is not there.
Okay.
So if you look at the title sheet from the applicant's plan on their preliminary plan sets, they did lay out the lots in a way that avoids the wetlands.
Okay.
But with that said, what's important about the ghost plat is showing the road connection, because these lots will be about 1/6 of the size that they're seeing here, because remember, this only gets developed if we have sewer and water. So
Okay.
we're not likely to see these, 1.5 acre lots that he's showing. But the idea is to show how could it develop and how could the street connections be made. But I think you'll feel more comfortable if you look not at Wenk's figure 2, but at the title sheet from the engineer.
Okay. Thank you. That's all I had.
I can address the difference in those figures if it's worth it to you, Brian. Otherwise, I can follow up after too.
That's fine if you'd like to.
Okay, figure 2 essentially came from, if you guys recall, the North Fork of the subwatershed assessment project that we did, that we partnered with the watershed on. So really that figure comes from identification of a potential water resource project area. So it's based off of modeling and whatnot. So it's really indicating more of a low-lying area. The wetland delineation is actually a more detailed analysis of the site. So the figure 1, where it's delineated wetlands and buffers, is the actual approved wetland delineation. The other one's more of a schematic and a tool that helps us identify potential project areas, if that makes sense, from the North Fork SWA.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions, Tom?
I do have some questions. Jessica, could we go to that pink and green slide that you showed? I'm, having been on Parks and Trails, we almost got a couple of these open space plots, and they're wonderful. It's just a super tool for developing this rural residential area. What I understood that it was supposed to be is you have a fairly large open area, and or maybe wooded or some other sort of configuration, and you put your housing all sort of in one spot so that those folks feel like they are living in an open area rather than doing a 10-acre slice and dice. You just have the folks living in a small area and everybody else, and the rest of it is left natural. And then you get these extra development rights, and it seemed like a great trade. And it just feels like this doesn't really do that. If you were to take out those housing lots and just sort of move them to the side and look at the pink area, it's not a natural area. It's a bunch of borders around the properties, along with a nice area down in the south. And the south part piece of that, I think, is just exactly what we would be looking for. But as I read those rules, the lots are supposed to have access to the open area, and at least half of them. And there really are only just 3 or 4 lots there that have access to that southern part of the space. The rest of them are connected to that 100-foot wide buffer that runs around the edge of the property. And it's quite it's unsatisfying is what it is for me. And it's hard to call the area under the power line as an open space area. I mean, it's an area under a power line. So that's kind of that is my issue with this particular development.
Kendra? So to Tom's point, I've thought about this OS&P, and I think maybe I'm thinking of this wrong, but the misnomer that people have is the open space preservation. It's only preservation until future development, correct? So
Mhm.
I mean, in reality, they could cluster their lots in a straight line and then have all that open space below it. But that's only open space until future development. Whereas I think people think open space preservation, the open space is there to be preserved for, you know, eternity for people's enjoyment, which really isn't the case.
Yeah, there's been an evolution of the open space preservation tool. I think initially Corcoran, when we wrote it in 2004, we did have them as permanent conservation easements.
Yep.
That is not legal under the current Met Council rules. You can't do that. So the way you can accomplish the same goal in our collective lifetime is through this tool, but they are temporary conservation easements. That's true, but I'm not sure if any of us will see the redevelopment of these parcels, but it does preserve them so that our grandkids, you know, may choose to live out here and redevelop those properties. And also remember, you guys talked about this, it is a tool to preserve natural features, at least in the interim, but is also the council's wish, as we wrote this again a couple years ago, to give rural landowners an opportunity to increase their development rights and meet natural resource and agricultural preservation goals of the council.
And to me, that's the balance that's there is I think, to Tom's point, the reality in Corcoran with the need for septic sites and well sites and all that, you're not going to get a lot of really small lots. With all the wetland we have here, you're not going to be able to cluster the homes together. Our super clustering requires that you have your own septic treatment, which may become closer to what Tom's looking for. But to me, this development kind of is from a practical standpoint, does a lot of what we're trying to accomplish. It's giving the people the right to use their property. It's developing a lot of nice homes, and it does keep some open space. Difficult to group those homes around that open space just because of the topography. I mean, you'd probably need, if you had a 300-acre development, you could probably come closer to that, but with a more limited property sizes, it's difficult to do. And I don't think we're going to get a developer coming and putting in that kind of a project for an OSMP, you know, with that many acres. That'd be horribly expensive and put a lot of money out there. So, so yeah, I think it's just a pretty good one. I think, and the one that I've seen on Mohawk that we have has worked out really well. And this is a little bit different than that, but I think it's going to be a nice development, assuming it sells.
To Tom's point, I do agree that those open spaces around those homes do look a little weird, but it's probably the only true way that those spaces will probably be preserved forever, because they're not buildable in what's left.
That's true. Yeah.
And they do provide some type of wildlife corridors around that community. So
that was actually there is 100-foot wide border that's required, and you do see that in Mohawk, and you do see that over off Tesmer, and it is intentional. We'll see over time how effective it is, but it's precisely to preserve the native plantings and provide those wildlife corridors. Yeah. And I do think it provides kind of it's not a huge space compared to what you look out in your backyards, but if you're moving from Plymouth, that's a nice buffer to look at.
Yeah.
Well, and I would echo that too, in that, I mean, you know, we're used to seeing these Ravinia type neighborhoods that would have so many lots shoved into this space that we wouldn't know what to do with them. And walking through this neighborhood with 1 to 4 acre lots, it's going to feel very rural.
Yeah.
It's going to feel beautiful and very open, even though it's owned by those individuals. So I wouldn't say that while it's not technically open space, it's still going to feel like we're shooting for here in Corcoran.
I agree, Brian. I'd love to see a lot of developments like this in Corcoran. It would, from a long-term standpoint, it would create a very nice city. So when I look at it.
The 100-foot buffer, we don't have any limitations on that they can't put a trail in that buffer, do we?
We do not have a limitation on that. They certainly could.
I don't.
They've promised to make it a prairie, so it won't be a mowed 100-foot buffer. It'll be a something else.
Well, that's what they've said they're going to
Yeah.
do again. That's one of the pieces we haven't seen yet. But
Yeah, it's easier said. It's easier to say that than to do it.
That's
for sure.
in the resolution, though, that they do it that way. Yes.
Yeah,
that is native area.
And I do feel better with the stipulation that they make that trail to the southern half of the property available to all the residents by actually connecting it to the roadway, or somehow.
Yeah, that seems to be a no-brainer.
Yeah.
Okay, any other comments, questions?
Yeah, I haven't said anything yet.
I know you haven't.
Can I speak?
I hope you do. Yeah, I've been waiting for you, John.
Well, again, we're in a situation where a farmer is faced with the decision of farming the land and getting $4 an acre corn, or developing it and making 100 years of harvest in a year. And I have no qualms with that. And the owner knows best what to do with their land. It's going to, again, be a situation where the neighbors aren't going to like it. They like looking at the farm field. And I actually see a ton in here that I like. And I think it is it looks like a really cool neighborhood. And I think that, some of the opinions should be taken with a grain of salt because they don't own the property. Like, for example, I will probably never live in there, but my opinion doesn't matter that much. Even though on council, in theory, we could change things, but we have established policies. They fit within the established policies. So I'm not gonna stand in the way of a development. Even, I was faced with this decision with land behind my property, and I'm sure you're all tired of hearing about it, but I had to say yes to a development behind my own house that I would see every single day instead of fields. And I have to be consistent about it here, where they're not doing anything illegal, and it happens, and it's hard to see, but if we're going to get development, they might as well be these kind. And it's also a reminder that the residents there are going to want to have nice natural areas too. So they're not going to make it look crappy. They're going to own it, and they're going to make it look nice, or whatever they think is nice. And so I'm sure the open space will be nice open space. And then the final thing is, with respect to the water displacement in the wetlands, it will get covered and hashed and rehashed with the watershed. So we have a lot of questions about the water issues when somebody puts in a development, and they are always taken care of by the watershed. So there's only so much as a council we can do with what somebody wants to do with their land. And this is a case where my opinion is that it looks like a very good project to have in Corcoran, even though it certainly takes away some of the rural aspects of our town, but they have the right to do that.
Okay, thank you, John. Okay, I'll entertain a motion to approve resolution 2020-38 as presented.
So moved.
Did you see?
Second, Schultz.
Any further discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye. Thomas, aye. Anderson. Anderson's muted.
Sorry about that. Aye.
Bodema,
Aye.
Dejewski,
Aye.
and Schultz.
Aye.
Great, thank you. And I wish the developer well on this one. I hope it's I think it'll be a good project for Corcoran. Good use of land. Okay, moving on to item 11, which is staff reports. Item 11A, it's active Corcoran planning applications. I guess we just received that, and if any question or anything want to be brought up, I don't think there's any action needed. And then item 11B, which is the pandemic response update. So Brad, I assume you'll give us that.
I'll let Matt start, actually.
All right, thank you, Mayor and Council. The state of Minnesota has now exceeded 22,000 cases, and we're approaching 1,000 deaths. Infection rates are continuing to escalate, so we evidently haven't reached the peak yet. Last estimation still placed the estimated peak between the end of June and August. Medical facilities are starting to approach capacity based on their current style of operations. There are some modifications they can make to increase capacity, and they have made arrangements for some surge capacity. Our city EOC has been up and running for 67 days now. We continue to help coordinate and organize our city services, kind of bring things together in our new way of operations. Helping to coordinate any necessary purchases, still monitoring PPE levels and ordering as necessary. We're still been able to maintain sufficient inventory as based on what we're currently projecting. We're continuing to have conversations about how we can support our community as businesses, churches, and city facilities begin to develop plans for opening, and also asking questions like, what will our elections look like, and how can we support them and help keep our community members safe and our staff safe as we look to the future. As of the claims for this meeting, the COVID expenses are just over 30,000. We're continuing to track and code any expenditures in preparation for any possible reimbursement that might be available. At this time, I don't foresee any major upcoming additional expenses. Obviously, we'll try and keep you in the loop if there's anything significant on that front. The Minnesota Department of Health is expecting that the protests in Minneapolis and the other cities are likely to accelerate the COVID transmission rates. Currently, the protests are having some operational impacts on our community. Some of those include the possibility of delayed availability for ambulance service and a lack of assistance available to our city if an on-duty officer or officers are busy on a call for service or an arrest. There's not a lot of extra bandwidth, and the other agencies that would help support us are obviously going to be drawn towards the other issues. We're doing what we can to adjust our staffing and putting staff on call to help prepare for any potential demand or surge in service that we could see. We're continuing to work with our neighboring agencies and our Lakes Area Emergency Management Group in staffing contingency planning, regardless of what might trigger that need. And I'd be happy to answer any questions if Brad has anything else, after Brad adds anything else he might have.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. I don't have much to add. Just that we're planning on having the June meetings still remotely, as not enjoyable as this is, and it will be tough. We have a lot going on. Staff's doing a great job. There's a ton of conversations. Elections has been with Jess and Michelle and Shauna. I think they were in trainings for, I don't know, 6 hours the last 2 days, 6 hours each day. We're up to about $30,000 in hard costs, which is a few thousand more from last time I talked to you. But staff is doing an exceptional job, and that's all I'll add.
Any comments, questions from council? Well, thank you, staff, Matt and Brad and Jessica, for a great job. You guys are just doing a super job here.
Just
all this.
One question, Mayor.
Go ahead, Alan.
Brad, have you heard anything more on the legislation that you heard from Representative Hertas at the last meeting?
No, and actually we've internally talked about, we're going to start doing reimbursement planning through FEMA now, just because we really can't really act on a potential legislative fix that may or may not happen. So unfortunately, we're probably gonna do more work going through FEMA. And if that changes, we'll adapt. But no, I don't hear any firm answers whether that's going forward.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else? Any other business to be covered? Anything from council? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved, Anderson.
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye. Thomas, aye. Anderson,
Aye.
Bodema,
Aye.
Dejewski,
Aye.
and Schultz.
Aye.
Okay. Thank you, folks. Good meeting. Covered a lot of
Thank
stuff.
you, everyone.
Nice job, everyone.
Thank you.